Lecture 8, Rise of Islam. About a century after the Western Roman Empire fell, Arab people united by Islam grew in power. In this lecture, beginning with Muhammad, we will focus our attention on this rise. Then we will examine the central tenets of Islam. This will be followed by various Catholic critiques of Islam, notably by St. John of Damascus, Hilaire Belloc, and Benedict XVI. Muhammad. According to multiple sources, the religious leader Muhammad was introduced to Christianity when he was a child from Mecca traveling through Syria with his uncle. Muhammad lived from 570 to 632. In the Syrian town of Basra, Muhammad met a Christian monk called Bahira in Arabic, and in the West, Sergius the monk. This monk indicated that Muhammad would become a prophet. Early Muslim references to Muhammad's encounter with this Christian monk include the Muslims Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Sa'ad, Ibn Hisham, al-Tabari. As we will see later, early Christians also referred to this incident. According to the Christian accounts, the monk Muhammad met was a heretic, possibly Arian. And I want to read an early Muslim reference to Muhammad's encounter with this Christian monk by Ibn Ishaq on Muhammad's meeting with Bahira. Abu Talib had planned to go in a merchant caravan to Syria, and when all preparations had been made for the journey, the apostle of God, so they alleged, attached himself closely to him, so that he took pity on him and said he would take him with him, and that the two of them should never part, or words to that effect. When the caravan reached Basra in Syria, there was a monk there in his cell by the name of Bahira, who was well versed in the knowledge of Christians. A monk had always occupied that cell. There he, that's Muhammad, gained his knowledge from a book that was in the cell, so they allege, handed on from generation to generation. They had often passed by him in the past, and he never spoke to them, or took any notice of them until this year. And when they stopped near his cell, he made a great feast for them. It is alleged that was because of something he saw while in his cell. They allege that while he was in his cell, he saw the apostle of God in the caravan when they approached, with the cloud overshadowing him among the people. When they came and stopped in the shadow of a tree near the monk, he looked at the cloud when it overshadowed the tree, and its branches were bending and drooping over the apostle of God until he was in the shadow beneath it. When Bahira saw that, he came out of his cell and sent word to them, I have prepared food for you, men of Quraysh, and I should like you all to come, both great and small, bond and free. One of them said to him, By God, Bahira, something extraordinary has happened today. You used not to treat us so, and we have often passed by you. What has befallen you today? He answered, You are right in what you say, but you are guests, and I wish to honor you and give you food so that you may eat. So they gathered together with him, leaving the apostle of God behind with the baggage under the tree on account of his extreme youth. When Bahira looked at the people, he did not see the mark which he knew and found in his books. So he said, Do not let one of you remain behind and not come to my feast. Later in his life, Muhammad claimed he received revelations from God in his heart, from a voice, and from the angel Gabriel. As will be evident in the subsequent section, these truths, quote unquote, resemble the Arian heresy. The likeness does not necessarily indicate causality, although some early and modern Christians have argued precisely for this causality. Like the Arians, Muhammad rejected the Trinity in his assertion that God is not three persons in one divine nature, but only one, and he, Muhammad, is the greatest of all prophets, even greater than Moses. Muhammad further claimed that Jesus is not divine, but only a prophet of lesser importance to the last and greatest of prophets, Muhammad. Another biblical person that Muhammad revered is Abraham. Muslims claim that they are descendants of Abraham through Abraham's son Ishmael. Muhammad believed his God-given mission as the greatest prophet was not to establish a new religion, but rather to restore religions to their pure state. The true undistorted religion of Islam, believed Muhammad, is to correct the Jewish excessive stress on law, justice, and the goods of this world, and is to correct the Christian excessive stress on mercy and the heavenly world to come. In the beginning, Muhammad only attracted a few followers. He also was persecuted by his fellow Arabs, who forced him to flee from his hometown of Mecca in modern-day Saudi Arabia to Medina. This is called the Hijrah of 622. In time, Muhammad successfully rallied together various Arabic clans under his leadership. In 630, Muhammad, supported by 10,000 troops, marched back to Mecca and captured the city. The Meccans then converted to Islam. After only a few days had passed, a nomadic army assembled against Muhammad's troops. Once again, Muhammad's army emerged victorious in their battle with the nomads. Around 6 months later, Muhammad headed north towards Damascus of modern-day Syria. He stopped, though, short of Syria in Tabuk. Later, when he had amassed even more allies from the various Arab tribes, he pushed forward to Syria. According to some accounts, Muhammad was accompanied this time by 30,000 men. In 631, after a number of military skirmishes and battles, the majority of Arab tribes struck an alliance with Muhammad. The following year, 632, Muhammad made a pilgrimage to Mecca and then died a few months later in June of 632. Muhammad's ability to conquer and unite people has gained him the reputation of being one of the world's most effective military leaders. As the military historian Richard A. Gabriel points out in his book, Muhammad, Islam's First General, and I quote, "To think of Muhammad as military man will come as something of a new experience to many. And yet Muhammad was truly a great general. In the space of a single decade, he fought 8 major battles, led 18 raids, and planned 38 other military operations where others were in command but operating under his orders and strategic direction. He was wounded twice, suffered defeats, and twice had his positions overrun by superior forces before rallying his troops to victory." End of quote. Central tenets of Islam. Islam's sacred book of revelation that Muhammad received but did not write down is called the Quran. It is possible that some scribes of Muhammad wrote down certain portions of Muhammad's revelations that he passed down orally. However, it was not until circa 650 AD, 18 years after he died, that the first official text of the Quran was made. In 900, the order of the many chapters of the Quran, called surahs, was officially agreed upon. At this time, the text was also standardized. Prior to 900, the text only consisted of consonants without vowels. This made it very difficult for later generations to determine what words a group of consonants were intended to form. Other sacred texts of Islam, which are not placed on the same sacred level of the Quran, include the Sunnah and the Hadith. The Sunnah of Muhammad is an esteemed work in Islam that describes the practices and habits of Muhammad that followers of Islam are to follow. Logically, it is considered by Muslims as a main source of their legal code called the Sharia, Allah's will for his people. The Hadith consists of additional teachings attributed to Muhammad that are not found in the Quran. There are various collections of Hadith. The 5 essential pillars that Muslims believe are required by Allah through the sacred texts of Islam are as follows. The Creed, which is simply, I bear witness that there is no God but the God, Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Daily prayers. Muslims are required to pray a set of ritual prayers accompanied by prescribed postures 5 times a day. Almsgiving. In Islam, almsgiving is mandatory and not voluntary. The alms are to be directed to the furthering of Islam and to help the poor. Fasting. According to the Islamic fasting regulations, all Muslims who are physically capable of doing so are, during the 9th Islamic month of Ramadan, to fast from sunrise to sunset. During this time, Muslims are also to pray with greater intensity and reflect on the Quran. Pilgrimage to Mecca. This pilgrimage is mandatory, but only for those who can afford to do so and are physically fit. The Hajj, pilgrimage, is ideally to take place at least once in a Muslim's life. So in summary, the 5 pillars of Islam are the Creed, daily prayers, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage to Mecca. A few interesting facts about Islam. Since details about Islam's beliefs concerning Jesus, Mary, Islam's expansion, and extraordinary growth are relevant for church history, we will begin with a few pertinent passages from the Quran. The Quran has such high esteem for Mary, the mother of Jesus, that an entire chapter, Surah 19, is named after her. According to this chapter and other chapters, Mary miraculously, as a virgin, gave birth to Jesus. Jesus, further claims the Quran, performed miracles but was not divine, and was a Muslim prophet who prepared the way for Muhammad, the final prophet and greatest prophet. We already saw how Islam quickly expanded under Muhammad's military leadership. Once the vast majority of Arabic tribes had come under the sway of Islam, it began once again to expand even into Christian territory. In 732, during the Battle of Tours, the Islamic army of the Umayyad Caliphate was defeated by the Franks of modern-day France, led by the Catholic prince Charles Martel. About a century later, in response to repeated Islamic incursions into Italy and Rome, the nearly 2-mile-long Leonine Wall that surrounds Vatican Hill, that houses St. Peter's Basilica, was constructed on orders of Pope Leo IV. In 1565, the Islamic Empire attempted to take the Catholic island of Malta, the Great Siege of Malta. Catholic knights successfully warded off this attack. Shortly after this battle, another large battle occurred not far away in the Gulf of Corinth, off the coast of western Greece. This was the 1571 Battle of Lepanto that the Catholic yearly October 7th liturgical feast day yearly commemorates. Once again, Catholic forces were able to successfully defend their territory from Islamic incursions. The sustained growth of Islam is quite astonishing. Currently, according to the CIA 2010 estimate, 22.74% of the world population profess Islam. This means that almost 1 out of every 4 people are Muslims. Catholics, in comparison, comprise only 16.85% of the world population. The Pew Research Center data from 2009 indicates that between 87 to 90% of Muslims in the world belong to an Islamic group called the Sunni. The second largest group of Muslims are Shia, coming in at 10 to 13%. Between 68 to 80% of the Shia population lives in 4 countries: Iran, Pakistan, India, and Iraq. The country that has the most numbers of Muslims is Indonesia, followed by Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. In total, there are about 1.57 billion Muslims in the world. Catholic critique of Islam. St. John Damascus's critique of Islam. The church father St. John of Damascus, lived from 675 to 749 AD, was born shortly after Muhammad's death. Muhammad died in 632. John of Damascus claimed that Muhammad was a heretic who patterned his version of Christianity on Arianism, and this is what St. John of Damascus says. There is also the superstition of the Ishmaelites, which to this day prevails and keeps people in error, being a forerunner of the Antichrist. They are descended from Ishmael, who was born of Abraham of Agar, and for this reason they are called both Agarans and Ishmaelites. He's referring to the Muslims. They're also called Saracens, which is derived from Saras Kanoi, or destitute of Sarah, because of what Agar said to the angel. Sarah has sent me away destitute. These used to be idolaters and worshipped the morning star and Aphrodite, whom in their own language they called Kabar, which means great. And so down to the time of Heraclius, they were very great idolaters. From that time to the present, a false prophet named Muhammad has appeared in their midst. This man, after having chanced upon the Old and New Testaments, and likewise, it seems, having conversed with an Arian monk, devised his own heresy. Then, having insinuated himself into the good graces of the people by show of seeming piety, he gave out that a certain book had been sent down to him from heaven. He had set down some ridiculous compositions in this book of his, and he gave it to them as an object of veneration. Hilaire Belloc's critique of Islam. The 20th century British Catholic historian Hilaire Belloc also considered Muhammad a heretic and Islam a heresy. And I'm going to quote from an excerpt from Chapter 4, The Great Enduring Heresy of Muhammad, of Belloc's book, The Great Heresies. In this excerpt, Belloc argues that Islam is a heresy of Christianity. Try identifying why he argues for this classification of Islam. Do you think he is correct? Why or why not? In answering these questions, keep in mind the Catechism, the Catholic Church's definition of a heresy. I quote, "Heresy is the obstinate post-baptismal denial of some truth, which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or it is likewise an obstinate doubt concerning the same. Apostasy is the total repudiation of the Christian faith." End of quote. So I'm going to read this quote from Belloc. Islam as a Christian heresy. Mohammedanism was a heresy. That is the essential point to grasp before going any further. It began as a heresy, not as a new religion. It was not a pagan contrast with the church. It was not an alien enemy. It was a perversion of Christian doctrine. Its vitality and endurance soon gave it the appearance of a new religion. But those who were contemporary with its rise saw it for what it was, not a denial, but an adaptation and misuse of the Christian thing. It differed from most, not from all heresies in this, that it did not arise within the bounds of the Christian church. The chief heresiarch, Muhammad himself, was not, like most heresiarchs, a man of Catholic birth and doctrine to begin with. He sprang from pagans, but that which he taught was in the main Catholic doctrine oversimplified. It was the great Catholic world on the frontiers of which he lived, whose influence was all around him and whose territories he had known by travel, which inspired his convictions. He came of, and mixed with, the degraded idolaters of the Arabian wilderness, the conquest of which he had never seemed worth the Romans' while. Muhammad preached with insistence that prime Catholic doctrine on the human side, the immortality of the soul, and its responsibility for actions in this life, coupled with the consequent doctrine of punishment and reward after death. If anyone sets down these points that Orthodox Catholicism has in common with Mohammedanism, and those points only, one might imagine, if one went no further, that there should have been no cause of quarrel. Muhammad would almost seem in this aspect to be a sort of missionary, preaching and spreading by the energy of his character the chief and fundamental doctrines of the Catholic Church among those who had hitherto been degraded pagans of the desert. He gave to our Lord the highest reverence, and to Our Lady also for that matter. On the Day of Judgment, another Catholic idea which he taught, it was our Lord, according to Muhammad, who would be the judge of mankind, not he Muhammad. The mother of Christ, Our Lady, the Lady Miriam, was ever for him the first of womankind. His followers even got from the early fathers some vague hint of her immaculate conception. But the central point, where this new heresy struck home with a mortal blow against Catholic tradition, was a full denial of the Incarnation. Muhammad did not merely take the first steps towards that denial, as the Arians and their followers had done. He advanced a clear affirmation, full and complete, against the whole doctrine of an incarnate God. He taught that our Lord was the greatest of all the prophets, but still only a prophet, a man like other men. He eliminated the Trinity altogether. With that denial of the Incarnation went the whole sacramental structure. He refused to know anything of the Eucharist, with its real presence. He stopped the sacrifice of the Mass, and therefore the institution of a special priesthood. In other words, he, like so many other lesser heresiarchs, founded his heresy on simplification. Muhammad's teaching never developed among the mass of his followers, or in his own mind, a detailed theology. He was content to accept all that appealed to him in the Catholic scheme, and to reject all that seemed to him, and to so many others of his time, too complicated or mysterious to be true. Simplicity was the note of the whole affair. And since all heresies draw their strength from some true doctrine, Mohammedanism drew its strength from the true Catholic doctrines which it retained: the equality of all men before God. All true believers are brothers. It zealously preached and throve on the paramount claims of justice, social and economic. End of quote. The following excerpt I will share with you is also from chapter 4 of Belloc's book. Here, Belloc offers several explanations for Islam's rapid growth. Once again, as you read the excerpt, try identifying Belloc's reasons that explain Islam's initial expansion. Do you agree with these reasons? Why or why not? Do these reasons help to explain Islam's sustained growth? And this is what Belloc says on Islam's success. There was indebtedness everywhere, the power of money and consequent usury. There was slavery everywhere. Society reposed upon it as ours reposes upon wage slavery today. There was weariness and discontent with theological debate, which for all its intensity had grown out of touch with the masses. There lay upon the freemen, already tortured with debt, a heavy burden of imperial taxation. And there was the irritant of existing central government interfering with men's lives. There was the tyranny of the lawyers and their charges. To all this, Islam came as a vast relief and a solution of strain. The slave who admitted that Muhammad was the prophet of God and that the new teaching had therefore divine authority ceased to be a slave. The slave who adopted Islam was henceforward free. The debtor who accepted was rid of his debts. Usury was forbidden. The small farmer was relieved not only of his debts, but of his crushing taxation. Above all, justice could be had without buying it from lawyers. All this in theory. The practice was not nearly so complete. Many a convert remained a debtor, many were still slaves, but whenever Islam conquered, there was a new spirit of freedom and relaxation. It was the combination of all these things, the attractive simplicity of the doctrine, the sweeping away of clerical and imperial discipline, the huge immediate practical advantage of freedom for the slave and riddance of anxiety for the debtor, the crowning advantage of free justice under few and simple new laws easily understood, that formed the driving force behind the astonishing Mohammedan social victory. The courts were everywhere accessible to all without payment, and giving verdicts which all could understand. The Mohammedan movement was essentially a reformation, and we can discover numerous affinities between Islam and Protestant reformers on images, on the Mass, on celibacy, etc. The marvel seems to be not so much that the new emancipation swept over men, much as we might imagine communism to sweep over our industrial world today, but that there should still have remained, as there remained for generations, a prolonged and stubborn resistance to Mohammedanism. There you have, I think, the nature of Islam and of its first original blaze of victory. We have just seen what was the main cause of Islam's extraordinary, rapid spread, a complicated and fatigued society, and one burdened with the institution of slavery, one, moreover, in which millions of peasants in Egypt, Syria, and the entire East, crushed with usury and heavy taxation, were offered immediate relief by the new creed, or rather the new heresy. Its note was not simplicity, and therefore it was suited to the popular mind in a society where hitherto a restricted class had pursued its quarrels on theology and government." End of quote. Benedict XVI on Islam. On the 12th of September 2006, Pope Benedict XVI delivered a controversial lecture at the University of Regensburg in Germany. It was titled, "Faith, Reason, and the University, Memories and Reflections." Without it being intended, this lecture sparked much debate and even street protests in some Islamic countries. Certain enraged Muslims responded to what they heard about this academic lecture by firebombing two churches in Israel's West Bank and by murdering a Catholic nun serving in Somalia. The one point Benedict XVI spoke on comes from a 1391 conversation on Christianity and Islam between the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaeologus, representing a Christian perspective, and an educated Persian representing an Islamic view. I'm going to end this lecture by just reading key excerpts from Benedict XVI's speech. I would like to discuss only one point, itself rather marginal to the dialogue as a whole, which in the context of the issue of faith and reason I found interesting and which can serve as the starting point for my reflections on this issue. The Christian emperor addresses the Persian Muslim, his interlocutor, with a startling brusqueness on the central question about the relationship between religion and violence in general, saying, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find things only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith he preached." The emperor, after having expressed himself so forcefully, goes on to explain in detail the reasons why spreading the faith through violence is something unreasonable. Violence is incompatible with the nature of God and the nature of the soul. God, he says, is not pleased by blood, and not acting reasonably is contrary to God's nature. Faith is born of the soul, not the body. Whoever would lead someone to faith needs the ability to speak well and to reason properly, without violence and threats. To convince a reasonable soul, one does not need a strong arm or weapons of any kind, or any other means of threatening a person with death. The decisive statement in this argument against violent conversion is this: not to act in accordance with reason is contrary to God's nature. The editor, Theodore Corey, observes, "For the emperor, as a Byzantine shaped by Greek philosophy, this statement is self-evident. But for Muslim teaching, God is absolutely transcendent. His will is not bound up with any of our categories, even that of rationality." Here Corey quotes a work of the noted French Islamist R. Arnaldez, who points out that Ibn Hazm went so far as to state that God is not bound even by his own word, and that nothing would oblige him to reveal the truth to us. Were it God's will, we would even have to practice idolatry. At this point, as far as understanding of God, and thus the concrete practice of religion is concerned, we are faced with an unavoidable dilemma. Is the conviction that acting unreasonably contradicts God's nature merely a Greek idea, or is it always and intrinsically true? A profound encounter of faith and reason is taking place here, an encounter between genuine enlightenment and religion. From the very heart of Christian faith, and at the same time the heart of Greek thought, now joined to faith, Manuel II was able to say, "Not to act with logos is contrary to God's nature." God bless.